So just getting down and pulling each one of these tiers apart separately, because it's a little bit of new language and it can sound a little jargony. You know, what is tier 1? Well, it's really good. I worked with a colleague and she put things so eloquently. She said, tier 1's good school. It's doing school well. And I thought, well, that's pretty eloquent, pretty profound way of putting it. It is about us having the behavioral and academic supports in our classroom that's going to equip as many children as possible to be successful. Is it going to cure? Is it going to eliminate students with really who need extra support? No. But it's about us being proactive and supporting as many as we can and increasing the achievement of all students within that tier 1 to give you some idea of how some of the pieces fit together. First, one of the critical pieces of tier 1 is what Chris and Dave have mentioned, is that universal district-wide assessment. That's something we don't have in Nanaimo Lady Smith Public Schools. We can't say how our grade 3s are doing across the district. We can't say that there is 30% of our children at McGurr Elementary in grade 3 that aren't reading on grade level, and we need to get some support. And we need to think about this. We haven't equipped our teachers with assessment at the beginning of the year that tells them exactly where those group of students are and where we need to bring in our speech language pathologist, our school psychologist, our counselors, you know, where we need to really focus their efforts. And so that's really something we're looking at the district to get that going. It's also about creating positive, healthy, safe learning environments in multiple ways. It's looking at the latest brain research about a learning environment. As adult learners, if you really need to concentrate and focus on something in depth, in detail, tell me where you would put yourself. Where would you go to really learn? Tax season is coming. If you had to go do your taxes, I picked that because it wouldn't be my favorite way to spend the evening, but I know the level of focus and cognition I would have to have. So if you think about that level of focus, where would you go as an adult learner? What would that environment look like? And I won't even make you talk to the mic. I'll just let you yell it out.
Place.
You're in a happy place.
I go to a quiet environment.
Okay, quiet environment.
I would go with an environment in which I had some other people doing taxes and that I could talk through the process.
Okay, so you would want other people around to have conversations, okay, for help and support, learning from others, okay? Other thoughts?
Space.
You need space, some openness. Okay, great. Other?
An expert.
You want an expert to touch base with, connect to. Okay, other things that you would do if you needed a place to learn and focus.
A place that's comfortable.
Okay, comfortable.
Minimal distractions.
Okay, minimal distractions.
And 911, my accountant.
911, my accountants, okay. So some of us want other people to talk to. Some of us want an expert to connect to. Some of us want places that are comfortable. So let's think, how many of our traditional historical classrooms would meet those expectations? That's part of the research that we as a district are looking at exploring. Not necessarily making every classroom look exactly the same. That's not the purpose. It's about us as educators understanding what positive learning environments look like and choices that may allow our students to be more deeply engaged in their learning. Proactive. Just doing, looking at that research and equipping ourselves as educators with that, as being part of it. Sometimes when I'm learning, I've noticed about myself, first the watch comes off. Like you can tell when I'm getting focused because the watch comes off. The jewelry bugs me. I usually am sitting on one leg. Sometimes I have to kind of stand up, walk around. I don't know why I process when I'm walking around, but having classrooms that have even those subtle shifts really increases student learning. So it's just something that we're thinking about and exploring as a district. 21st century learning experiences. That ability to have an expert to connect to about something that I'm interested and passionate about, that ability to have some peers, small group, collaborative learning experiences. We know that's going to be important for some of our students. Think about when we have to work together to learn something with other groups. What kind of life skills do we get?
Communicate.
Communication. How many of you work as employers? Or you work in an environment with other people? How important is communication as a life skill in today's world? Critical thinking, being able to analyze. So when you here at Dover Bay, you see this 21st Century Symposium, you're looking at making an investment and thinking about those teaching strategies, those engagements. That's the work that you're doing in Tier 1. Again, it gets our students engaged, it gets our students excited about learning, and it's preparing them for their adult life. That's part of that Tier 1 learning experiences. And it's the instructional practices that promote the learning of all students. When we're thinking about reading comprehension, one of the things we're looking at as a district, and again, we haven't had it historically in our district, are those universal effective practices that as a district we're coming alongside our teachers and make sure they have the resources and skills they need to use these effective practices. There's so much research out there about the brain and learning and teaching. We just have to have mechanisms in our districts to help teachers have those opportunities. Again, the passion's there, the commitment's there. Now it's time for us to come alongside. So the district has really begun to identify those first steps, those critical teaching learning experiences like balanced literacy, which impacts literacy kindergarten through grade 12. Because which teacher in our district, would you guess, does not teach or embed literacy in their instruction? I don't hear you giving any examples. Because every single teacher in our district is responsible for helping our children grow in those areas. Yes?
Right, so are we going to try and avoid compensating for children and giving them compensation strategies, and rather, like you're talking about research on the brain, that there is so much out there now, let's get to the problem with these kids and remediate.
And the teacher is
and not just
responsible for
fail
covering for a year.
We'll
A year
tend to
is
tailor it.
insurmountable. It's like 93 learning outcomes. For
That
grade
is-
4 and reading language arts.
It
is 93. Part of this, and the conversation we really get down to with teachers, is having conversations about what are the most essential learning outcomes. Just to give you an idea of something that our teachers are facing. If you look at British Columbia, and this is common throughout North America, so it's not in any way saying that what we've done here historically is bad. It's across North America. But the number of learning outcomes that a teacher is responsible for covering for a year is insurmountable. It's like 93 learning outcomes for grade 4 in reading language arts. 93 different things. So if a teacher is required to cover those things, as opposed to focus in on what's essential for our students to be equipped with, it changes the dynamics of what's happening in the classroom. So if I know, and I've identified that reading comprehension is essential learning for our students and being able to read and comprehend at grade level, then it's what we're doing. We're going to be very focused on making sure that we're supporting our students. Because one thing that's different about the interventions, and we'll get to the next couple slides, but I'll tell you a little bit what's different about Tier 2 interventions than what we've done historically with some of the work that we've done for students who are at risk. Is there anything you'd like to add to the Tier 1 component of this work?
This is the most critical tier. This is where you want teachers and the teams to be primarily focused. What we're trying to do through this model is turn the special ed world on its ear and almost purge the phrase special ed from our lexicon. By approaching each student, and a big part of this model is about getting out in front of failure. So you don't wait for students to fail in an RTI model and then react. You screen universally up front. You see what the strengths and the areas requiring growth are, and you begin to map out a plan for each student that reflects the areas of growth that they require strengthening in. And a team works with the student if it becomes a pretty significant challenge. But the idea, though, is to use pretty progressive current strategies linked to what is known as developmental cognitive neuroscience. The whole field of human learning has evolved significantly over the past 2 decades. So for those of us who were trained, as I was over 25 years ago, in terms of how to be a teacher, many of those human development theorists now are completely outdated. The new theories of learning tell us that the brain is plastic. So we often assume that many students coming into the classroom with what looked like learning disabilities were on that trajectory for the rest of their school days with us. Their brain was what it was. There wasn't much we could do about it. We know that that is completely untrue. That there is a lot we can do with children, especially the younger the better, to help them rewire their brains and get them on a much stronger trajectory around being ready to learn effectively in our classrooms. So a lot of the strategies you want to use at the Tier 1 level are oriented towards strengthening children's brains. And one example I give is, in the old structure, what we would often do is wait for the child to start to show a number of signs of what we would call a learning disability. Then maybe we would bring on a clinician like a psychologist. And then we would have that psychologist take that child aside for up to 6 to 10 hours or more and do a whole range of tests that often ended up in front of teachers who did not find any of that information of much value. So what I like to say to people is, do you want to spend $5,000 on a psychologist test, or do you want to buy that child a $200 rocking chair? Because a lot of the problems that children have are connected to physical and emotional regulation. They can't focus for reasons that are beyond their control. And instead of saying, we need to discipline that out of the child and force them to be compliant with our expectations, we need to stop doing that and say what this child needs is a tool to help them focus. With some kids, it's very simple. It could be a 25-cent piece of plasticine that they sit at their desks and roll into little snakes. For others, it could be a swivel chair. I've been in classrooms where we have put stationary bikes, treadmills, mini trampolines, anything that will help these kids regulate physically and emotionally before anybody should expect them to learn intellectually. So that's what we're talking about with universal Tier 1 instruction, is looking at those methods of readying kids for learning in what are known as constructivist classrooms. Curriculum today is all about expecting kids to figure out things for themselves. That's a lot of what the instruction is oriented to. It's pretty hard if you're a little muffin who comes in and neurologically, you're just not ready for it. And you could be not ready for a variety of reasons. So one of the key things that we need to do at this Tier 1 level is really take a good look at our students who are struggling in particular and try to figure out what they need in order to be able to teach themselves to focus on learning. And it can't be about punishment, because they don't need that. Punishment just further dysregulates their little brains and stresses them out even more and compounds the problem. So when we talk about these universal Tier 1 methods, that's what we're aiming for, is making sure that we provide students with the tools they need to focus themselves on their learning. And once you teach them to do that and they self-select, they just take it over. And those are the first steps toward teaching young children to be strong, self-directing learners, which is another 21st century competency. We want kids to know how to teach themselves. So those are the points I'd like to make.
I can't help but feel inspired by the concept and the ideas, and I'm just wondering from that as a district that you're working on that, what sort of challenges or supports do you see coming from the province in relation to trying to implement these types of things? That struck me in particular when you were talking about learning outcomes, because the province sets the learning outcomes, and you're saying, well, we're going to tear those down, so
Could I speak to that for a bit? The positive news is the Providence, the BC Ministry of Education is moving in the same direction. They're currently revising those learning outcomes in close contact with our BC Teachers Federation, so they're actually partnering together to focus those down to look at what's really essential learning competencies for students at each grade level. So then teachers can focus on ensuring deep learning and mastery instead of feeling like their hands are tied to do all this coverage. So that piece is there coming from the ministry to support that work.
Yeah, I think the province is quite interested in what we're doing. So we're trying to assist the province actually in shaping their own long-term strategy, particularly around special needs education. Again, I would contend that we identify too many children as special needs children, when in fact they may have just a couple of little things they need to tweak neurologically, that we can help them tweak and they'll be just fine. Thank you very much.